Hello and welcome back to another episode of Thoughts on Doctor Who. Today we will be talking about Season 1, Series 1, I always forget, Episode 3, Boom, written by Stephen Moffat. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the only non-Russell T Davies written episode in the entire season. And obviously Stephen Moffat has written a ton of Doctor Who before. He was a showrunner during the Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi eras, and I was very curious as to what kind of episode we'd get here in terms of, like, would I be able to tell that it's been written by someone else, and would I be able to be like, oh, this feels like a Matt Smith or a Peter Capaldi episode compared to Russell T Davies episodes. And to be honest, usually when I think these kinds of things about these kinds of, like, you know, if a book is written by someone different, or, you know, a story that you expect to be written by someone is written by someone else, usually, no, I don't really notice, like, too many personal flourishes, but I think because RTD has written so many episodes of Doctor Who, and because Stephen Moffat has written so many episodes of Doctor Who, yes, I was able to tell that this was a Moffat episode. This was a Moffat episode through and through, for the best, I think, because this is my favourite episode so far this season. It was incredible. Now, when I say it felt like a Moffat episode, in many ways this is kind of like, I can't quite put my finger on why it feels like a Moffat episode, but there are things I can point to, like, right from the start, the way he sets up with, like, the showing, like, the civilization, or not civilization, but, like, the world that we're going to before we see the Doctor in it. I feel like that's quite a Moffat thing. Some of the things he has the Doctor say in terms of, like, almost being quite judgmental about the ignorance of the people around him, that feels very, you know, like the Star Whale situation. He's got some absolutely fantastic quotes. He gives some decent speeches. Also, I would say this episode is quite a lot darker than the opening two episodes, and while Russell T Davies has done dark before, I would say Stephen Moffat kind of wields darkness in Doctor Who a little bit more aptly than maybe Russell T Davies does. Also, I apologise, I don't want to be getting at comparison here. I don't want to be pitting Russell and Stephen against each other like they're bitter rivals. They're not, they're buds. There's a really nice little scene. It's not a scene if it's real. There's a moment in the latest Doctor Who Unleashed which is just Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat stood in the TARDIS talking about Doctor Who and, like, how they see, you know, Doctor Who and what it's like writing Doctor Who and that kind of thing. And it's if you don't watch Doctor Who Unleashed, I would watch it purely for those 5 minutes. It's really interesting to hear. And yeah, if you're wondering how I feel, like, does Christian have a preference? No, because David Tennant is one of my absolute favourite Doctors, and Matt Smith is one of my absolute favourite Doctors. I really like Christopher Eccleston. I really didn't get on with the Peter Capaldi era, so if we're just talking straight up figures, I think I've enjoyed more Russell era episodes than I have Stephen Moffat era, and yet, I don't know, while you can go back and watch last week's thoughts on this, while I enjoyed the first two episodes, especially the second episode, I do feel like this was almost refreshingly familiar ground in terms of tone. With Space Babies and The Devil's Chord, Russell T Davies is very much leaning very hard into the idea of, like, what if we did things we've never done before in Doctor Who? Like, not just leaning into the supernatural, but also leaning into the whimsy a lot more as well. And while that is fun, it is a little refreshing to be in familiar territory. So, to talk about the actual episode itself, what happens in it, the premise of the Doctor being stuck on a landmine, and how do you build an entire episode around that with, like, twists and things happening, and it's like the Doctor's trying to keep the situation calm because he knows that the way this landmine's technology works, it's not just going to be him that blows up, it's going to be half a planet because he's a Time Lord. And, you know, this episode isn't perfect. They left out a little bit of, I guess, sci-fi babble to maybe explain why, or maybe they didn't leave it out, but maybe it just went over my head, it didn't sink in. But the basic idea is that the landmine converts the person into the bomb, which seems kind of inefficient if you ask me, but who's asking? And it's used to turning humans into bombs, and he's a Time Lord. If it turns a Time Lord into a bomb, it's going to be a bigger bang. Now, as I was watching this episode near the beginning, first of all, I think Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson gave probably their best performances so far. Like, absolutely fantastic. Which is funny because if I'm putting the pieces together, I think this episode was shot earlier than The Devil's Chord and maybe Space Babies as well, so that's almost me saying that their performances got worse over time, which I'm not. But yeah, as I was watching it, I was thinking of, like, I don't know why, I don't normally do this, but I was kind of taking the temperature of the Doctor as a character, maybe because we're still pretty recent into a regeneration, and 15 is still pretty new to us. And, this is a very tense situation. This is a kind of situation we haven't really seen 15 handle yet. I mean, no, there's been tension, obviously, but, in terms of, his life specifically is in danger. But he left the TARDIS to go and help someone else because he thought he heard someone else in trouble, which he did. That man is dead. And so I was stood there, I was watching, I was thinking, the Doctor explaining this landmine situation to Ruby, his main concern, if I know my Doctor, is going to be Ruby and the person that he set out to save. So the first thing he asks her to do is to see if that person that he set out to save is okay while he is standing on a landmine. And the second he said, the second he asked Ruby to go and do that, I was like, yep, that's the Doctor. Also, I know I've already mentioned the acting, but, the Doctor as a character is very, very active with, body movement and stuff. So to have to act this entire episode while barely being able to move, Ncuti knocked it out of the park with, facial expressions and just, minute gestures and stuff like that. You could really tell that he was under a lot of stress. And obviously, some of the things we don't really give people enough credit for, a lot of the stuff that also goes into that is, the choice of shots, focusing on his slightly trembling hands as he's, singing and stuff. That was also a really nice touch. Now, you might be able to tell I'm recording this in the daytime. I'm able to talk more naturally, not worrying about being too noisy while other people are asleep. But I did still watch this episode last night, so I haven't rewatched it or anything. I apologise if I'm missing out details. Still kind of trying to figure out where to fit in recording thoughts on Doctor Who with the weird, the episode airs at midnight kind of a situation we found ourselves in. And I think due to the nature of the plot of this episode, it is very much the Doctor is stuck on a landmine, what do you do? Looking back on it, even though it was a full 45 minutes, it doesn't feel like a lot happened, not in a bad way, but just in terms of recollecting it. I really enjoyed Ruby having to deal with oh my god, this isn't fun anymore, in terms of adventuring, what do I do? And then we haven't really seen her argue with the Doctor all that much yet. It was fun to see her arguing with the Doctor because the Doctor was clearly trying to get her to try and save him in a way which would not endanger her, which would be a less safe way of saving the Doctor due to that, and she wasn't having any of it. He was I want you to toss the weight to me. We'll get to what that weight is in a second. I want you to toss it to me and I'll catch it and adjust my weight as I catch it. And she's like, that is way too dangerous, I'm just gonna pass it to you. He's like, no, because then if I blow up, you'll get caught in a blast. And this is before it's established that if it goes off, the entire half the planet will explode. So I guess that's maybe slightly plot hole-ish, unless he hadn't figured that out yet. But yeah, the weight I mentioned is the compacted body, the remains of this soldier. And the soldier, by the way, is an ordained priest, I believe they said. This is a very religious military situation. And I love a line where Ruby says, wait, since when was the church the military? And the Doctor's like, it is most of the time, you're living in a blip. And I thought back to other Stephen Moffat episodes, the first time 11 meets River Song, the military is also quite religious, and I believe there's also some with the silence and stuff. When the Doctor is saving Amy's baby, the military there is also quite religious. So this is clearly an idea that Moffat wants to stick in the Whoniverse, I guess, as a canon concept of if you look back in our history, with the Crusades and stuff, religion and the military have always been quite intertwined, and so Stephen Moffat sees it as that's going to happen again in the future, and that's kind of going to be the standard. Stephen Moffat has a lot to say about religion in this episode, or at least he has a lot to say about religion through the mouth of the Doctor, and I didn't disapprove. I'm atheist, but I very much kind of believe in not looking down on people for having faith. I think atheists who think that they're the smartest people in the room just because they don't believe in God, they're exhausting. So when he had his rant about faith is really handy because it means you don't have to think for yourself and all this stuff, I was a little bit whew, okay, that's a little bit scathing. It's one of those things where it's I don't disagree with what he said, but I disagreed with the way that he said it. But he was stood on a landmine, and he was arguing with someone who was about to let their faith cause the end of a world. So I kind of get where he was coming from, and I did like that little bit at the end of the episode where they're like, "Oh, Doctor, we thought you didn't like faith," and he's like, "No, but that doesn't mean I don't need it." And that might not be the way I would have kind of like regained the balance myself, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And the way I'm talking about it really makes it sound like I am someone of faith. I'm really not. I am atheist, but like I say, I just have a lot of thoughts about the way that a certain group of atheists behave towards a certain group of people who are not atheists, if you know what I mean. There were also some other Moffat-y ideas which were kind of not reused but revisited, such as an AI being used as a person's kind of like gravestone. We saw that a little bit in Silence in the Library or whatever it's called. I can't remember episode titles today, I'm very sorry. Also, the kid reminded me a lot of the kid in that episode too. Just, I don't know, the way she's written, I guess, the way she talks to her dad, and the way she's kind of like almost one-dimensional in that respect. I saw some people criticize, like, the girl had no moment of realization that her father was dead, no moment of like what was really going on. But to me, I think having been a child going through that kind of realization, not in that context, and not in the same way that this girl did, but I feel like it's almost realistic that she would kind of like, you can see that she knows, but she hasn't accepted it yet. And I think especially like when the AI is showing her photographs of their time together as father and daughter, and like all this crazy shit is going down, and she's just like, "Oh, yes, look, this is the time we went to the beach together," or whatever she says. That's not what she says, I know, but she says something similar, like antelopes or something. That is straight up avoidance. Like, she's rejecting reality and focusing on the past. I think it was realistically written. Maybe she reached a whole "he's not gone, he's just dead" thing at the end of the episode a little bit too easily, but other than that, I think she was fine. Oh, I should also talk about the continuing mystery of Ruby Sunday, right? I didn't really dedicate any time to this in the previous 2 episodes, but the fact that, like, every time I talk about Ruby's past, like, snow appears, and that's, you know, that's not something that should happen. I know there are a lot of budding theories about Ruby's parentage, and The One Who Waits, and Susan Twist. I'm not doing the thing I used to do, which is, after every Doctor Who episode, I used to go to Reddit and read the comments, and read people's reactions, and get annoyed at people I disagreed with, and my particular thoughts on the episode would probably just be skewed to the, you know, common hive mind way of thinking eventually as well. But I would also read a bunch of theories, and try and figure out what they could all mean, and this would inevitably lead me down self-fulfilling disappointment holes of like, the Rani's gonna show up. Not that I even know who she is, I've never seen her in Classic Who, but you know, the way that someone as you know, swayed as me back then could be, of like, oh, Reddit wants this, I want this. It's embarrassing. It's very embarrassing that I was ever like that. But I do think, if you don't know the theories, you know, the theory is that Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter, is going to make some sort of return. I don't know if she's The One Who Waits, and I don't know if she's Susan Twist. But there is a lot of evidence, the fact that they keep bringing up the fact that the Doctor is a dad. I think it might be more likely that instead of seeing Susan, we're going to be seeing Susan's parents or parent. Like, for instance, I don't know if this is a theory going out there or not, but this is a Christian original idea building off of theories I've been seeing floating around. The One Who Waits is posed as this villainous person, right? That being said, The One Who Waits was also, I think The One Who Waits might be more on like the supernatural god spectrum side of things than the Doctor's bloodline side of things. Still, this whole thing has a slightly villainous kind of air to it. What if the Doctor's kid was angry at the Doctor for abandoning Susan, and that gives them a motive to kind of strike back at the Doctor, and then you could have this whole thing of like the Doctor being aghast that his child, who he hasn't seen or thought of in hundreds, if not thousands of years, or maybe perhaps never even met yet because Wibbly Wobbly, hates him, and that he has been a neglectful and bad father in his adventuring ways. And maybe that could be kind of like the core conflict in the Doctor's heart throughout this season, or towards the end of the season. I don't know. Obviously a very half-formed theory, not entirely using a lot of evidence, But that's where I think this could be going. Because in this episode, when the Doctor's talking to the girl's dad, the AI version of him, he says, like, dad to dad, you don't let your kid down no matter what, right? And all this stuff. And it's interesting that the Doctor is suddenly, talking about this version of himself that's a father, considering he almost never brought it up before. And I think also you could argue that part of that is just like this whole 15 is a more he's been to therapy, quote unquote, kind of thing since he was 14, at least, not literally, but that's the way he's being written. And so maybe now he's more open to talking about his past in those kinds of ways. I should talk about Ruby getting shot, shouldn't I? The problem with Ruby getting shot is it's not a finale, and I know there's more Ruby to come. So I can't lose myself in a narrative in a way that, like, I read some people on Twitter who was like, I shouted out when it happened, I was so worried for Ruby. Unfortunately, my brain doesn't do that. I can't, like, forget the fact that she shows up in later episodes or whatever. Sometimes, rarely, I will get faked out, but it's like the same thing with, like, Donna Noble at the end of the second special, Wild Blue Yonder, when they tried to fake out, like, oh no, Donna's not gonna make it. My brain just goes, yeah, okay. I mean, she's obviously fine. If anything, it kind of pulls me out of the drama more than it pulls me in because of that. But I did really like it as a device for, like, continued stress on the Doctor when it's been established that, like, an adrenaline rush in his body is enough to cause the landmine to detect him just a little bit more. And I did like the idea of, like, what would it look like to 15 if he lost a companion, because for a minute there he doesn't know if Ruby's dead or alive, and it seems very certain that she's going to die, and him having to pull himself together and not just go, fuck it, everything's over, and just stepping off a landmine or whatever. And again, Ncuti played it extraordinarily well. There's also the fact that this Monday character is played by Varada Seifu, who is going to be a companion in the next series, and a lot of people are going, wait a second, why is she here? Why is she a random soldier in this episode? And we've had some behind the scenes kind of explanation of, like, she didn't know she was going to be a companion by the time she had finished acting this role, so that makes you think, like, is she being cast as an entirely new character? Is she cast as the same character because the actual name of the companion hasn't been released yet? Is this going to be a Clara Oswald situation? Not that they would ever just straight up repeat a plot like that. Is this going to be a situation where Varada's playing one of her own, like, descendants, like the Doctor goes back like 100 years later? Because RTD has done that before in series 1, season 1, series 1, in the Christopher Eccleston series. He visits a space station at one point and has an entire adventure there, and then the series finale is set in the same space station, which he revisits, and he's like, wait a second, I thought I fixed all of this. And something about Boom revisiting some of Stephen Moffat's previous ideas, like the AI tombstones and the religious soldiers, has me thinking, like, what if RTD revisits some previous ideas, such as revisiting a planet that the Doctor thinks he has saved later down the line and finding out that he hasn't, and maybe that's where he meets his new companion. I'm personally of the opinion that it's not going to be anything as complex or convoluted as the Clara Oswald situation. Some people are also speculating that there's some wild theories out there. Some people think that Ruby is secretly the Doctor's kid and therefore a Time Lord, and that she bigenerates into Varada Seifu and then they both go travelling with the Doctor. My first problem with that theory is the Doctor and Ruby's relationship is not one of a father and a daughter, and I don't think it could transition into one of a father and a daughter either. They're two besties. They're just besties. That being said, Time Lords have been known to regenerate into the appearance of a person that they have seen before, such as Peter Capaldi's Doctor, so maybe, that isn't entirely without merit, but I don't think it'll be Ruby bigenerating. Honestly, I don't really know what it could be, so I'm just ruminating wildly. But yeah, I think by and large that pretty much covers my thoughts for this episode of Doctor Who. I just want to reiterate one last time, this episode was incredible and will probably go down as one of my all-time favourites. Just so good. I really hope they get Stephen Moffat back to do more episodes. I know he's going to be doing a Christmas episode coming up, but I think he really shines when he does individual episodes. Like, clearly he had some problems writing entire seasons, like entire seasons worth of plot lines, but also, like, for every stinker that man has made, he has also made something incredible. So I think he knows that too. So I hope he's happy with himself for Boom, because Boom is really good. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Unless you're going to be mean, in which case you can do one. And then I'll see you in whatever I make next.